The Israeli military recovered the bodies of 2 hostages from the Gaza Strip. 48 living and dead hostages remain. Fighting continues throughout northern and southern Gaza. We're going to look at the bombing of Nasser Hospital and Israel's attempted assassination of the Al-Qassam spokesperson Abu Ubaidah. We're also going to cover the humanitarian situation in Gaza, some regional developments between Israel and the Houthis in Yemen, and the United States declaring a ban on the Palestinian leadership from traveling to the United Nations General Assembly in September. This is the Israel-Palestine Report with Professor Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Thursday, August 28th, the Israeli military carried out an operation in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, recovering the bodies of 2 hostages that have been held in Gaza since the attack on October 7th, Ilan Weiss and Idan Shativi. Very few details have been published about the circumstances of this operation. However, what we do know is that it took place somewhere in the central parts of the Gaza Strip. In Israel, it was reported that the bodies were retrieved from an area where no active fighting is being conducted, and since there were also no Palestinian reports about casualties that occurred during this specific operation, we can assume that the bodies were located in an area controlled by the IDF. Presumably, this is either around the areas of the buffer zone here, or in the northern parts of Han Yunis, or the more southeastern parts of Gaza City. Both Weiss and Shativi had been killed in the initial attack on October 7th, and their bodies were kidnapped back to the Gaza Strip. It's also noteworthy that Weiss's wife and daughter had also been kidnapped alive and were returned to Israel as part of the hostage deal at the end of November of 2023. So with this, how many hostages remain and where do things stand in the negotiations? Before continuing to that, I'll remind everyone, hit that subscribe button to stay up to date on all the recent developments in the Israel-Palestine arena. So, with the recovery of the bodies of the 2 hostages, there remain 48 hostages held in captivity in the Gaza Strip, of which 28 are in fact confirmed dead by Israel and other intelligence agencies. 20 hostages have been considered alive by Israel and have also been the focus of the ongoing negotiations. However, it's also important to note that over the past 10 days, U.S. President Trump has repeatedly stated at least 3 times that at least 1 or 2 of the 20 hostages have died in captivity. Trump stated this 2 weeks ago. He also said this again on August 25th, when he said that there's less than 20 hostages alive, that 1 or 2 have died. Despite this, Israel has not updated its hostage list. Israel has said that they have no knowledge on what Trump is relying on. There are some reports in Israel there's some concern over the conditions of hostages, but right now, the official numbers at least still say that there are 20 live hostages that are held in the Gaza Strip, alongside 28 bodies of hostages that are held by the different Palestinian organizations in Gaza. That is still the focus of the negotiations. So where do things stand on the negotiation front? Over the past week, there's been little movement, I have to say, on negotiations themselves. Both Egypt and Qatar have heavily criticized Israel for not giving an official response to the latest proposed deal and for allowing negotiations to move forward. As a reminder, on August 18th, Hamas gave its approval to a partial deal that focused on the release of 10 live hostages and the return of the bodies of 18 hostages in exchange for a 60-day truce in Gaza, the release of Palestinian prisoners, an expansion and revamping of the distribution of humanitarian aid in Gaza, and an IDF redeployment and negotiations over an end to the war. Israel, however, neither officially accepted nor officially rejected this proposal. Instead, the country repeatedly stated that it is adhering to its terms that focus on a complete end to the war, not a partial deal, and that would require Hamas disarming, the release of all hostages in one move, not partial releases, Gaza's complete demilitarization, i.e. that weapons cannot be rebuilt in Gaza, Israel maintaining security control over the Strip, and the establishment of a civil administration in Gaza that is neither run by the Hamas or by the Palestinian Authority. Over the past week, both Qatar and Egypt heavily criticized both Israel for not responding, as well as the United States for, according to those countries, not applying enough pressure on Israel to respond to the proposal. On August 26th, the Qatari Prime Minister Mohammed Athani went as far as to state that the proposal that Hamas has agreed to is virtually identical to the one that Israel had agreed to in the past, and that he does not understand why Israel is rejecting the proposal at this time. Despite this, negotiations at the present time remain heavily frozen. All eyes instead are focused on whether or not Israel is going to push forward with expanding its military operations in the Gaza Strip, whether Israel is going to move towards taking over the remainder of Gaza City and the central camps in Deir el-Balah. That is what Israel said it's going to do if Hamas does not accept its conditions for ending the war. Right now, negotiations at this point are frozen. Remains to be seen if there can be some breakthrough in the coming days. Turning to the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip, there was continuous fighting throughout the Strip over the past week, with the majority of violence focused primarily in the northern regions of Gaza in the areas of Zaytun, that is in this area over here, as well as in the southern parts of Gaza in western Han Yunis, this area over here. In the northern parts of the Strip, on August 24th, the Lebanese El Mayadin reported that the IDF had been carrying out major detonations of buildings in the areas of the Jabalia refugee camp. On August 29th, videos were also published showing the demolitions of these different infrastructures, all in the areas of Jabalia. Fighting in Zaytun itself was reported nearly every day, and specifically on August 29th and August 30th, the Al-Qassam brigades reported firing mortars and ambushing IDF troops with gunfire, and the IDF reported major airstrikes in the region, targeting Hamas units throughout those days. In addition to this, on August 30th, the Israeli military reported an explosive device that detonated near one of its Namer vehicles in the areas of Zaytun, resulting in 7 IDF soldiers being injured. Meanwhile, in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in addition to the ongoing fighting and the IDF continuously expanding the Magen Oz corridor, that is a corridor that the IDF has developed along this area that severs Han Yunis from east to west, the most significant event took place on August 25th, when IDF tanks repeatedly bombed an area of the Nasser hospital in Han Yunis. The incident began with an initial bombing of a complex in the hospital, which was reportedly done without any prior warning. Then, as rescue teams were attempting to evacuate casualties, and dozens of reporters also arrived on scene as a result of that first bombing, a second wave of bombing happened, targeting that same area and resulting in journalists and medical staff being among the casualties. In total, 20 people were reported killed in those various attacks, including among them 5 journalists who worked for AP, Reuters, and Al Jazeera. Immediately after the attack, the Israeli military stated that the hospital is meant to be a protected zone, but that Hamas operates from within those medical facilities, and stated that the military is investigating the incident. However, it's also important to note that, unlike a lot of incidents where the military says it's investigating but the reports are never made public, hours later, the Israeli military did state that its investigation shows that the IDF forces were targeting a camera that Hamas had put up in the areas of the hospital, and added that the attack should have been done with snipers rather than with tank shells, and that matter specifically, that incident in which tanks were used instead of snipers, is being investigated by the military. The military also added that among the casualties are 6 Hamas operatives, including one who had participated in the October 7th attack. However, it also stated that that was not the aim of that bombing. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu also issued a statement in English later in that day, stating that the incident was a tragic mistake, and adding that Israel values the work of journalists and medical staff and is fighting a just war against Hamas. I will say that his statement notably was only put out in English, not in any other language. Since then, however, the incident has been widely condemned by a long list of countries and also has been mentioned by the United Nations. And on August 28th, Sky News reported that the camera in question that the IDF said it was targeting as a Hamas camera was actually stationed at the scene by Reuters and was operated by Hussam al-Masri, who's a Reuters employee who was killed in the first wave of those attacks. In addition to these incidents, there were also repeated bombings and airstrikes that were reported throughout the week in the areas of Han Yunis, and there were also some notable airstrikes that occurred in the central parts of the Gaza Strip, specifically the Al Bureij refugee camp in this area over here. In addition to this, hours before recording this, Palestinian sources reported a massive airstrike that took place in the Ansar region in the western parts of Gaza City in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, targeting an area near a local bakery and resulting in 11 people being killed, including, reportedly, several children. Shortly after, the Israeli military reported that it had attempted to assassinate the Al-Qassam spokesperson, Hudayfa Kahlot, who's better known as Abu Ubaidah. The Israeli military reported that the attack was done with direct armaments and that attempts were made to avoid civilian casualties as much as possible. At this point, while I'm recording this, it is unclear if Abu Ubaidah was successfully assassinated or not. I will say that Abu Ubaidah, while being a spokesperson, is one of the most known figures within the Al-Qassam brigades, and if he was assassinated, this will be a major, I'll say at least moral blow to Hamas and the Al-Qassam brigades. In turn, if he survived that assassination attempt, he will probably gain a lot of notoriety, much like Mohammad Def did, surviving a lot of attempts by the Israeli military. Regarding casualties, 2 IDF soldiers were reported killed in the Gaza Strip over the past week, both as a result of IDF crossfire or explosive charges misfiring in the Gaza Strip. This brings the total number of IDF soldiers killed in the Gaza Strip since the invasion of Gaza began to 456, and 2,883 IDF soldiers reported injured. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip, in turn, reported that 749 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip over the past week, bringing the total number of Palestinians killed in Gaza since the war began to 63,371, and 159,835 Palestinians reported injured, again, since the war began. I remind everyone that the Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip does not distinguish between militants and civilians. It simply accounts for the total amount of bodies that have been brought through Gaza hospitals. I'll also say that last week, The Guardian published a report on Palestinian civilian deaths in the Gaza Strip. I do plan on publishing an analysis of this article and what we know about how many civilians versus militants have been killed in Gaza. In the coming days, I'll publish that on my channel on YouTube. If you're interested, hit that subscribe button and you'll be able to see when that comes out. On the humanitarian front in the Gaza Strip, over the past week, the increase in humanitarian aid coming into the Gaza Strip has continued, both in the form of aid paradropping missions, as well as an increase in the amount of aid trucks that are being allowed into the Gaza Strip. Despite this, conditions of severe hunger and malnutrition continue to be reported throughout the different regions of Gaza, with reports of food scarcity still leading to excessive prices, even in markets where food is available. A total of 51 people reportedly died of malnutrition conditions in Gaza over the past week, bringing the total number of Palestinians who have died from such conditions since the war began up to 332. Beyond these facts, the majority of news relating to the humanitarian conditions in the Gaza Strip over the past week relate more to the ongoing fighting and more to the upcoming IDF's expansion of its military activities into Gaza City. Throughout the past week, it was reported that the Israeli government has instructed the military to expedite its plans to evacuate some 800,000 Palestinians from the areas of Gaza City, these areas over here, and to relocate them southward in the Gaza Strip, and that the Israeli government is instructing the military to take over that entire region in the coming weeks. On August 29th, the Israeli military announced that the daily humanitarian pauses in the region that had ceased all military activity between 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. are now officially canceled, so fighting is going to continue throughout the Gaza City throughout the entire days. The military also called upon all Palestinians to evacuate that region, stating that, quote, every family that moves south will get the maximum civilian aid that is being developed. The military also added that it is bringing in tents, developing areas for aid distribution, laying down water lines, all this happening in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in anticipation of that mass relocations of Palestinians from the northern parts to the south. Amidst this, and related to this, on August 28th, the Israeli military announced that 2 new distribution sites of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation are going to be opened in the southern parts of Gaza, replacing one site that will be closed in the Tel Sultan region. The IDF published videos of these distribution sites being developed, stating that with their completion, 5 distribution sites will now be operating in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip in the coming days. In addition, a day later, the United Arab Emirates also reported that the water pipeline delivering drinking water from Egypt to southern Gaza has been completed and will begin operating in the coming days. So again, all this is about improving the humanitarian conditions, specifically in the southern parts of the Gaza Strip. On the flip side of this, however, Israeli reports from August 29th also stated that the humanitarian paradropping missions, those missions of countries that are paradropping food into northern, central, and southern Gaza, are going to be phased out and no longer be allowed to happen in the coming days. And that more broadly, the entrance of humanitarian aid into northern Gaza is also going to be gradually limited. Those reports added that this is part of the IDF's efforts to mobilize the Palestinian population southward, limiting the aid that is coming into the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, while simultaneously developing more facilities that are being offered and delivered in the southern parts of the Strip. So that is all within the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Before I conclude, there are two more arenas I'm going to briefly relate to. The first is the Houthi arena, the organization that controls large parts of Yemen. After intensifying rounds of missile fire and IDF retaliations, including for the first time the Houthis firing a cluster missile detonating in several locations that had happened last week, the Israeli military carried out several substantial attacks in Yemen at the beginning and at the end of the previous week. While the first one on August 24th targeted power plants, missile silos, as well as the presidential palace, the second was the more substantial one that occurred on August 28th and involved a major multifaceted assassination attempt of the majority of the Houthi civilian leadership. Chief among those who was assassinated was the Houthi Prime Minister Ahmed Ghalib al-Rahoui. However, in addition to him, reports indicate that the majority of the civilian Houthi leadership was killed. Among others, and I emphasize these reports are continuously emerging, those who were assassinated in the airstrikes reportedly include the Houthi foreign minister, government secretary, alongside the ministers of welfare, agriculture, economy, justice, and propaganda. And I will say there are also unconfirmed reports at this time that the Houthi defense minister, as well as the military chief of staff, were also injured. By the time I recorded this, the Saudi Al-Arabi reported that following the attack, a total of 4 Houthi ministers remain in their positions. The rest have either been assassinated or have been injured. With that, it's also important to note that while this targeted the civilian apparatus of the Houthi leadership, the majority of the military apparatus did not appear to be the target of these attacks, and thus it is likely that we're going to see substantial retaliations and more rounds between the Houthis and the IDF. Obviously, we'll see more about this. I'll report more if there are any major developments in the coming days. The second arena that I'm going to relate to is the diplomatic one. Coming into September, many countries, including France, United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada, have indicated their intentions to recognize the state of Palestine in the UN General Assembly that is meeting in 3 weeks, and this has led to diplomatic backlash both from Israel and from the United States over the past week. In Israel, Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar stated on August 26th that the military attacks on Israel are being replaced with a diplomatic siege that is aimed at imposing a Palestinian state on the Israeli country, and added that, quote, there will never be a foreign sovereign or foreign military west of the Jordan River, end quote. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu also stated on that day that he had promised 25 years ago to stop the establishment of a Palestinian state, and added that this is being done with the facility of the settlement project every day. In addition to that, on August 28th, the Israeli cabinet met to discuss possible annexation of different territories in the West Bank in response to state's intended declaration to recognize the state of Palestine. So again, Israel is talking about recognizing and annexing different parts of the West Bank to Israel. Some of the debate has been about annexing specific settlement blocks. Some talked about annexing the Jordan Valley in this area here. Some talked about annexing all of the West Bank. Again, at this point, this is only being debated, but it is part of a retaliation, so to speak, to the diplomatic recognition of the state of Palestine. France, in turn, indicated that it is considering opening an embassy in the Palestinian Authority next month after it recognizes a Palestinian state. In addition to these responses from Israel, on August 29th, the United States State Department made a surprising announcement stating that it will not issue visas to Palestinians in order to come to the UN General Assembly in September in 3 weeks. Importantly, the list of 80 diplomats who would be affected include the Palestinian Authority chairman Mahmoud Abbas, who in the circles of the United Nations is actually referred to as the president of the state of Palestine. Explaining this, the U.S. State Department stated that, quote, the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, and the Palestinian Authority are not living up to their obligations and are endangering the chances of peace. And the statement added that the visas will be cancelled due to support of terrorism, taking unilateral moves to establish a Palestinian state, and glorifying violence. In a moment of analysis, I'm going to say that this is somewhat reminiscent of an incident that happened in 1988, when again the United States similarly denied the access to PLO chairman Yasser Arafat. The United States said that it was not going to issue him a visa to speak at the United Nations in retaliation to the PLO declaring the foundation of a Palestinian state and supporting the first Palestinian Intifada. Back in 1988, in response to this, the UN General Assembly decided to convene for the first time in almost 40 years outside of the United States, and the UN General Assembly met that year in Geneva in order to allow Arafat to address the General Assembly. At this point, the current move in 2025 of the United States has been condemned by a series of actors, including the United Nations itself. It remains to be seen if and how this matter is going to be resolved. There's no talk of the UN assembling elsewhere like it did in 1988, at least not yet, but remains to be seen how this matter will be resolved or if any states will take further action. Obviously, remains to be seen. That concludes my latest summary of the Israel-Palestine Report. If you find these reports informative, please do remember to subscribe, send them on to anyone you think might be interested, hit that like button. If you have any questions or comments, do feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I am Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.